Okay, no, the dollar is not sinking, jumping into, not out of the dollar. I hope that's counterintuitive and strikes you to make you think that I'm smoking crack. The subtitle is An Alternative Currency Solution to Escape Financial Ruin while Recirculating Constitutional Money in State and County, $1 at a time. Okay, where's, with this one, I'll just use that button. How's that? Is that right? Okay, that's the question. Everybody who knows anything about money tells us in the prints and on the radio and on the TV and on the YouTube that the dollar is sinking now for good. If you can read that sinking ship, the shrine on the forecastle is the Eccles Building. Who knows what the Eccles Building is? Okay. And the motto of the Eccles Building, as is the motto of all bankers and central bankers, is Fortuna ex nihilo.
Money out of nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And everywhere we read, responsible, intelligent people tell us or ask us questions or make announcements such as these. The US dollar has lost 97% of its value since 1913. De-dollarization, what happens if the dollar loses its reserve currency status? BRICS currency, doom and gloom, always focused on the dollar. Oh no, we have a calamity. The truth is we are standing before a calamity at least equal to the 30 Years' War, which by the time it was done had killed a third of Europe. We're at least on the doorstep of that. But the problem is, and that's what I hope to rearrange our minds on, is that the evil that afflicts us has usurped the name of the cure, which is the actual United States dollar. So the question is, can we escape our misapprehensions? Can we undo layers and layers of misuse of terms? And I'm going to cite here, as one of my friends and heroes does in other contexts, the Abbé de Condillac. Anybody remember him? He was one of the pre-Enlightenment, Enlightenment thinkers of France. I say pre-Enlightenment in that he was Enlightenment, high Enlightenment, but when people think of French Enlightenment, they think of such losers as Rousseau, who gave us 200 years of blood and horror. Well, there were a couple of Frenchmen who thought soundly and had sound souls, and one of them was a universal genius by the name of Abbé de Condillac. Instead of applying observation to the things that he wrote this in a chemistry book that is one of the foundations of modern understanding of chemistry, to the things we wish to know, we have chosen rather to imagine them. Advancing from one ill-founded supposition to another, we have at last bewildered ourselves. Why is it not advancing here? It's advancing not on my screen. Bewildered ourselves amid a multitude of errors. These errors, becoming prejudices, are of course adopted as principles, and we thus bewilder ourselves more and more. The method, too, by which we conduct our reasonings is absurd. We abuse words, which we do not understand, and call this the art of reasoning. When matters have been brought to this length, when errors have been thus accumulated, there is but one remedy by which to be restored to the faculty of thinking. This is to forget all that we have learned, to trace back our ideas to their source, to follow the train in which they arise, and to frame the human understanding anew. That's hard to do, but it is necessary in this subject and in many subjects. We have people all around the world who call themselves economists, and they study and find out and map the laws of economics, and then they apply them to economic phenomena such as labor, such as buying and selling, such as all the economic phenomena you can think of except money. For some reason, they unconsciously imagine that money is the only economic phenomenon not subject to the laws of economics. There is one great exception, and that's the Austrians. If you know what the Austrian School of Economics is, it's the only school of economics that recognizes that the laws of economics apply to money just as they do to every other economic phenomenon, and they're the only school of economics that understands what money is and how it works. Now, the tragedy, the paradoxical tragedy, we widely regret that our Constitution poses no credible threat to our actual form of government. And that's largely true in every area of governance. But if it is true, at least we have a few people like us in every part of the Constitution, every aspect of it, every aspect of our constitutional order. There's usually at least a handful of patriotic, intelligent, understanding people who articulate and defend a general return to lawful constitutional government, with one exception. That's a tragic exception. Why not for money? And the Austrians, who, like I said, are the only people who understand money, half of the world's Austrians live in America. And their headquarters, their center of gravity is Auburn, Alabama. And they run the Mises Institute. And they do marvelous things. But tragically, most American Austrians are as ignorant of what our Constitution has to say about money as the rest of their countrymen are, maybe worse, because they're indifferent to it. So we got some blessings and some curses here. I argue that of every aspect of our Constitution of which Americans are woefully ignorant, the two most important about which they know nothing are money and the Constitution, and our militia institutions and the Constitution. The average American and the average patriot scholar knows more about the surface of the moon than he knows about what our Constitution has to say about money and what our Constitution has to say about our militia institutions. So that's an interesting defect, but in my opinion, and in my experience, it's readily remediable. There's only 3 steps you need to do. You need to memorize the handful, and I've outlined them in yellow in your open book quiz in your Constitution. There's a handful of monetary clauses in the Constitution. Memorize those. Easy peasy. Then understand the terms of art. Now this is where we need to recognize that our Constitution didn't invent the United States. The United States had existed since 1776. It invented some new things, a new Congress. We had a Congress before, but the new Congress is absolutely different. We had a president before, but the new presidency is absolutely different. So it invented some new things and spent a lot of words defining and explaining those new things. But our Constitution also carried over lots of things, concepts, principles, institutions that were hundreds of years old, and every one of us then, putting us back then, knew exactly what was meant by them, and so the Constitution spends no words explaining what any of those things are. That's peculiarly the problem with our militia institutions, and peculiarly our problem with money. There's probably a dozen terms of reference in the monetary clauses of the Constitution, and because we've suffered 100 years of public education, like Rip Van Winkle, we've gone to sleep for 100 years, even though we all agreed to this before, we don't remember. We don't even remember what we meant by that. That's the problem. Okay, real quick purview, monetary clauses are very, very short. Okay, the first one is in Article 1, Section 8, gives Congress power to do several monetary things, right? Article 1, Section 9 tells us that our state governments may not do several things. It imposes disabilities. Constitutions are all about granting powers and imposing disabilities. Tells them several things it can't do, but among the things that it does is it reserves explicitly, even though the rest of the Constitution already reserves in the 10th Amendment explicitly everything that has not been devolved upon the general government, reserves that to the several states or the people respectively. Even before that amendment was passed, we wanted to make sure that it was clear that we were reserving to Tennessee and Georgia and Michigan and every other state the power to make legal tender laws, but imposing a disability, limiting the exercise of that power, this is the wrong paragraph, limiting the exercise of that power only to gold and silver coin. One of the things that we carried, I was on the wrong slide, one of the things that we carried over that had existed for a long time, that we didn't invent anew with our Constitution, and therefore we didn't define it, was the dollar. And in 2 places in our Constitution, we make very clear that we have carried over as the unit of account of the United States what was the unit of account yesterday and the day before that, going all the way back to just after independence. And if you really want to take it back, 100 years before there was a United States, that dollar was the second of 2 monetary units of accounts in America when they were British colonies. Okay? Again, we impose some disabilities on each of the states. We specifically prohibit any state from what coining money, emitting bills of credit, right? Making anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, right? Or making any law impairing the obligation of contracts. And we also, in the Amendment 7, again, reminded everybody that we're carrying over the dollar. The dollar is the same thing that it always was, and it is still the American unit of account, and there's another place where we show that. What am I doing wrong? Help me out, Justin. I'm doing the same down arrow that I've been doing.
The squirrel's going to catch up with all too fast.
Do I have to wait for the squirrel to catch up? It's the squirrel. It's the squirrel. Okay, that's what we need to understand. A dozen terms of art in the handful of monetary clauses. Every one of them is a term of art that has a very specific meaning that is settled in several hundred years of Anglo-American law and constitutionalism and monetary activity. So that's what we need to understand. There are, in those monetary clauses, no de novo creations. You know, we created a Congress, we created a Senate, those are de novo creations. And so we spend a lot of words describing what they are and how they work. None of these crucial terms of reference defines itself in our Constitution because we all agreed we knew what they were because they'd been the same thing for hundreds of years. But again, like Rip Van Winkle, we've been asleep for 100 years. If you're like me, you went to public schools and you learned none of what these specific things mean or even that they have specific meanings. But it's all knowable in the legal history. And we'll talk about how you can get a guided tour of that par excellence. Okay, going back to what Condillac said, okay, in carrying this principle, in carrying over every word, phrase, or concept that we did carry over, all those terms still mean what they meant before. If you and I do a contract for sale of this house and we give its legal description, it is what it was before we sold it, and 100 years from now, the deal is still what we agreed to then, even if one of us forgets, gets Alzheimer's like me. Yes, sir?
Please explain de novo creation.
Oh, something created from scratch. I'm sorry. So think of the Congress, think of the Senate, think of the President. We invented several things that didn't exist before, and for each of those, you know, half of the Constitution's text is what? Congress. Why does it take up half the text? Because it's a complex organism that had never existed in that form before, and so we had to intricately describe it, define it, tell how it works. But when we say jury trial, when we say due process of law, when we say the right of the people peaceably to assemble, those are things that everyone understands because everyone's understood for hundreds of years what they mean. And when we say dollar, when we said dollar, everyone, since we'd been using it for over 100 years, everyone knew exactly what it was. Only question was exactly how much is one weighed, and we'll get into that later. So that's the problem. Anybody remember this movie? You keep using that word, but I don't think you keep using that word dollar, and I don't think you know what it means, and that's pretty much the beginning of our discussion. If we're going to talk about money, it's certainly one of the first terms of references that we all ought to be on the same page about, because it has only one meaning today, and that's the meaning that it had in 1787, and that it had in 1788, and that it had in 1707, and every time in between. But a lot of us have forgotten what it means and actually thinks it's one of those green things. And that is a fatal misconception. So we need to understand money in the Constitution. These are some of the terms of reference to which I referred. We need to understand, what is credit of the United States? What does that mean? What is pledged collateral? Two kinds of pledged collateral. Movable and immovable is one way that we say, or we say real property and chattel, okay? Borrow money on the credit, does that have a specific? Yes, that has a very specific meaning, borrow money on the credit of the United States. What is the difference between borrowing money on the credit of the United States and borrowing money on the collateral of human beings? Big difference. What is meant by the value of money coined by Congress or the value of foreign coin? What do those terms mean when they're used in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5? What does exactly that mean? What does it mean there when it says Congress has power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, meaning of the coined money that they coined, and of foreign coin? What does regulate the value in that specific phrase mean? Does it mean Congress determines how many loaves of bread this will buy? No, but you might think that if you'd been asleep for 100 years. What is meant by fix the standard of weights and measures? Well, it can mean one of two things: define and memorialize as a matter of science and history what a pound is, what an ounce is, what a, whatever. Or it can mean inventing and defining a new standard. In the case of money, we do both. We carry over the dollar, but we also invented a new coin called the gold eagle, and since it was new, we had to define it, and we defined it with reference to the silver dollar. What are securities? How are securities different from, say, bills of credit? Are they the same? No, they're not at all the same thing. What is current coin? We give Congress power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. Well, what are the securities of the United States? What is the current coin of the United States? You got to know that, okay? What does it mean to counterfeit the securities of the United States, and how is that different from, say, counterfeiting a dollar bill or a $5 bill? That's not counterfeiting anything that's punishable by the Constitution, but counterfeiting a U.S. bond is, okay? So we have to know what all those things are, exactly what they mean in a specifically monetary constitutional framework. What does it mean to make a thing in tender of payment of debts? Well, your first impression might suggest one of two things. It might mean, here, I'm tendering a payment to you. I'm making a tender of a payment, okay? But in a more common usage, more widespread usage, it meant for a legislature to say, when Johnny makes a contract with Sally and one of the parties doesn't perform and the other party sues and you get a court judgment and the court judgment is $20, throughout our history and the history of mankind, sometimes legislatures can step in and they say, well, I know the judgment was in dollars, but if he gives you a note for $1, that's just as good. That's what usually people think of when they think of legal tender statute. Or, both of those are legitimate under the history, both of those are legitimate interpretations, and both of those are forbidden in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 to any of our states to do. Okay, this is, aside from, again, what we have to do to repent civically in this area of our gross negligence is, one, memorize the words of the very few and short monetary clauses. Two, learn the specific references of the very specific, careful terms of art used. And third, apply those in relation to each other and compare, and how does that relate to this? And, just do normal exegesis. How does this term relate to this term? How does that clause relate to that clause? How do they all fit in the whole coherent fabric that is the Constitution of the United States? That second step, I'm introducing you to the world authority on this subject. He's a friend of mine, but he also happens to be the world authority on two, what I think are the most important aspects of our Constitution about which we know the least: money and our militia institutions. I used to introduce Edwin to groups as a recovering four-time Harvard graduate until he corrected me. You see, he got his bachelor's, his master's, his PhD, and his JD at Harvard. You think that would make him useless for any patriotic civic endeavor, but it's not so. And he explained to me, no, David, I never drank the Kool-Aid. I did not have to undo my education. And the reason why, he says, David, I first studied my bachelor's and my master's in chemistry. And there was none of that rot in the physical science department that is everywhere else so famous at Commerce, at Harvard. And so I learned to think in a discipline like the Abbé de Condillac, in a disciplined way, define my terms, use them consistently. And I had that discipline of mind so that by the time I went to the JD, to the law school, and by the time I went and got my PhD, I was immune to the Kool-Aid. So he maintains that he never drank the Kool-Aid at any time. He has won 2 cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, and most important for our purposes here is that he is the author of the standard work on this subject. And I brought copies to display you can look at tomorrow. I bring them to every National Committee meeting because I try to persuade people to read them, okay? This is the standard work, and it will be the standard work hundreds of years after our Lord has returned in glory, and I have no qualms about stating that. It will be the standard work 500 years from now. It's quite a tome. It's a 1,700-page law school text. It has 6,500 footnotes and citations, but it's a delight to read. His prose is, if you've ever read Gibbon's Decline and Fall, it's that beautiful a prose. It's crystalline, lucid as the sun is in the sky, and he has a dry wit. He's got a thoroughness that we call Preußische Gründlichkeit. Have you ever heard that phrase? Prussian thoroughness, even though he's not Prussian. I consider myself very well read and have never read his mind later than the 19th century, and mostly not later than the 18th or 17th century, because we've become a post-literate civilization. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to ask you, what are some of the powers that we have devolved on our general government, monetary powers? What are some of the powers that we have devolved on our state? Or I'm going to ask the question, what are the monetary powers that we have devolved on our state governments? I'm going to ask you, what monetary powers do we simply acknowledge as existing in our general government? Which do we acknowledge as existing in our state governments? Which do we acknowledge as existing in you and me as natural persons? And what disabilities have we imposed on the general government monetarily? And what disabilities have we imposed on our state governments? We're going to go through that. So these, if you read those several clauses, you will find out, and you know what each of the terms of art means, you will see that we have devolved upon our general government the power to create a new coin, if it wishes, and we have done that, to adopt an existing coin, which we did. We'd been using this dollar for, over 100 years, and we decided at days after independence to keep using it, and we decided in the Constitution Convention in Philadelphia to continue using it, okay, to define the weight and fineness of a new or existing coin. We have exercised, Congress has exercised all those powers. We have the power, we've given to Congress the power to strike a new or an existing coin to an existing standard. We've been using these dollars that were minted in Spanish mints for several hundred years. Well, we've decided with our now new Constitution, let's mint our own. Got to be to the same standard. Got to be to the same standard, but let's put a U.S. eagle on it and United States on it instead of the Spanish imperial emblems of, the pillars of Hercules and, everything having to do with Ferdinand and Isabella. We've conferred upon our general government the power to regulate the value of the United States coin. Okay? And we've also conferred upon Congress the power to regulate the value of foreign coin. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're going to find out. What monetary powers do we recognize in the general government as extrapolations under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, right? Power to make all laws that shall be necessary, which shall be necessary and proper for carrying it, right? Okay, which are growing out of that like a flower opening. Well, to declare what money it will accept in receipt of dues and taxes. You remember Andy Jackson? Who remembers Andy Jackson's Treasury Circular? Okay, Congress had passed a law saying when you buy land from the general population of the United States, you must pay in U.S. dollars or U.S. gold eagles, period. But we had kind of winked in some instances, the Treasury had kind of winked the other way and accepted people's notes and people's bank notes. Well, Andy Jackson, he comes up and he tells the Treasury Secretary, we're going to follow the letter of the law and we will accept nothing but real U.S. dollars or U.S. gold eagles, okay? To issue securities, so whenever the government borrows money, it makes a bond. That's a security. When I get a loan from a bank, that's the instrument, that is the instrument of that debt, is a security. Okay, that's what that means. To provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities of the United States and the current coin. Well, what is the current coin? You might guess, well, that's U.S. coin. Well, yes and no. What does current mean? Why do we say currency? It's currently circulating. So if Congress makes laws domesticating Spanish, Austrian, British, Swedish coinage and regulates the value, as it has power to do, against the U.S. dollar and says this many of this is equal to one of those in America, before our courts, in our customs houses, then that foreign coin becomes the current coin of the United States because it's circulating currently in the United States. Okay, so, but you notice that we never gave any power to Congress to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting people's private notes, including Federal Reserve notes. So if anyone ever counterfeits, say, a $50 bill and gets sent to jail, he was sent to jail unlawfully because there is no power to provide for punishing the counterfeiting of private notes. Only the securities of the United States and the current coin of the United States. Okay, and of course, these grow out of this. Okay, what monetary powers have we granted to the state governments? None. Our whole federal concept is no, people in that state can grant what powers they want. And 10th Amendment, we make clear that if we haven't forbidden it to you, it's yours, unless the people of your state forbid it to you.
So counterfeiting a Federal Reserve note is not against the law?
No, it is not against the Constitution. There is statute to put you in jail for it. Lots of statutes. But those statutes themselves have no lawful authority because we never gave Congress power to provide for the punishment of anything but the securities of the United States and the current coin of the United States. Boy, yeah, you'll go to jail.
Yeah.
And the judge will cooperate happily, okay? But there is no lawful authority. Like most criminal statutes, there are hundreds of U.S. criminal statutes. Hundreds of them are unlawful because they stand on authority that was usurped and never granted, okay? Oh, in the people themselves, the Constitution acknowledges that you and I, as natural persons, naturally have any inherently lawful monetary power, right? If it's not inherently criminal. What monetary disabilities? Disabilities are just as important as grants of power, right? Because that's what constitutionalism is all about. Granting power and imposing fences, disabilities, right? What monetary disabilities have we imposed on the general government? Well, to debase money below the constitutional standard. Okay, we've imposed, this is very important. We have denied the general government, and therefore we have forbidden it, to emit bills of credit. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had power to borrow money and emit bills of credit. And in Philadelphia in 1787, there was a big knockdown drag-out because a couple of people, including Luther Martin of Maryland, were adamant that we need to give our new Congress that power too. But everybody else, because of all the experience of paper money mayhem, said, no, Luther, no, Luther. There was only Luther and one other guy, I think, who stood up for that. No, never again. And we're going to forbid it to the state governments. There will be no governmentally emitted bills of credit in this country ever again. If banks and persons want to emit bills of credit, God bless them, and people can go to law if they want to sue somebody, but there will never be, we wanted to cut that one off at the knees. We've imposed a disability. Congress can't borrow anything that is not money as known to the Constitution. We have imposed a disability to borrow money and decline to repay it. Think of FDR, okay? To repay borrowed money otherwise than out of the Treasury of the United States. Right now, government borrows money, our general government borrows money and pays it by means other than that, so it's not lawful. Or money pays it with money out of the Treasury of the United States that was not emitted from the Treasury according to appropriations made by law. Again, not lawful, so we've not allowed that. We have we have imposed a disability on the general government from ever chartering a bank. We discussed very openly whether the Congress should have power to charter corporations, and as Jefferson rightly reminded President Washington when he, asked Hamilton and Jefferson for his opinion about whether he should sign this bill about the United States Bank, Jefferson reminded him, as you know, sir, I was in France, but as you know I know from the record, and as you know, we very vociferously decided to deny Congress the power to charter any corporation. And the reason we did was because so many people were afraid that Congress would charter a bank. So, okay, we denied that power. We've denied Congress the power to pretend to vest governmental powers in private persons. That's what the Federal Reserve System is all about. That's, anyway, that's fascism. The government pretends to invest in a private corporation governmental powers. Oh, did I say to declare notes of private persons? Oh, this is crucial. The whole crux, the whole pinion on which the entire Federal Reserve System operates, what makes those Federal Reserve notes current. Remember, that word current means it circulates. Why would you circulate a worthless note? Why do we circulate worthless notes? We all know that they'll never be redeemed. Why do we circulate them? Because in the Federal Reserve Act, Congress called those notes obligations of the United States. Now, if you owe me 20 apples, okay, and then I owe you 3 apples, I can come to you and you can offer me a set-off. That's why the federal government, the general government of the United States, receives from foreigners and from Americans in payment of dues and taxes due to the general government in dollars, it accepts Federal Reserve notes because Congress has already unlawfully called those its own obligations. So if you want to pay me your worthless note, I've already called it my own obligation, so I'm on the hook for it. So yeah, I'll take it in lieu of a dollar. That's why they circulate. The other two reasons, well, we'll talk later about the other two reasons they circulate, but they have to do with Bretton Woods and they have to do with the 1970s and oil. So what monetary disabilities does the Constitution impose on the several states' governments? Well, black and white. They can't coin money. They may not. They may not emit bills of credit. They may not make something other than gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And they may not pass laws. They may not pass laws impairing the obligation of contracts. By our Constitution, we have imposed no disabilities on ourselves as natural persons. If it's inherently lawful, we retain the right and the power to do it. So, you all know probably everyone here knows that every aspect of our current monetary regime is grossly unconstitutional. There's no gainsaying that. There's no putting lipstick on that pig. Yes, that is a calamity, and yes, it has destroyed all personal financial freedom. That's not deniable. Yes, it has destroyed the predicates for the common man to ever earn an income above bare subsistence, and those are free and honest trade, a working price system, a way to store value of labor. It's destroyed all those things, which are the historical predicates that Adam Smith discovered made it possible for suddenly we can make more than subsistence. But you have to have all three of those things, and we all recognize the Federal Reserve System has destroyed all three of those predicates. But, and this is more important, it has destroyed all personal property, all personal privacy. You probably know that since the 70s, in direct contravention of the Fourth Amendment, your bank answers the requests of Treasury and other aspects of the general government and tells them what you do with your money without a warrant, without suspicion of crime. You know that, and you know that gets, as technology advances, with CBDCs, you know the end is near. Everything you do with, even right now, if you're a Canadian and you were a bunch of truckers, you know that they simply turned off your access to your property, okay? That's possible, okay? That's where we're going. So yeah, all these things are terrible. It's poised, I would say the Federal Reserve System is undeniably poised on the verge of creating a totalitarianism that is beyond what Stalin and Lenin dreamed. And it actually matches what John the Revelator saw on the Isle of Patmos. We're right there on that threshold. All those things are true, but is there any good news? Okay. The good news is yes, guess what? Congress has not committed every constitutional monetary sin that it might have committed. Really? You mean there's something it didn't do wrong that it might have? Yes. You're going to say I'm pulling your leg, but I'm not. And the crux of our escape lies in that, knowing Congress, in all its monetary sins, almost everything that Congress has done with money for the last 100 years is grossly unlawful. Not everything, but almost everything. But it has never called that a dollar. So that's a gross sin that it could have committed, but it didn't. That's important. It has never called a Federal Reserve note the monetary unit of the United States or the monetary unit of account. Pay attention. That fact is terribly important.
Repeat that.
Congress has never committed these three sins. It's committed lots of other sins as far as transgressing the Constitution with relation to money. But Congress has never called this a dollar.
The Federal Reserve note is not a dollar.
No, and Congress has never called it a dollar.
Okay.
It is a note for a dollar. Just like my check to you for something is my promise to give you something.
And that's why in the law it says that a Federal Reserve note can be exchanged in the Treasury for the lawful.
That's part of a very important story that I can't go into. But yes, you're onto something. You're onto something. But Congress has never.
Not the dollar, even though we call it one.
Yeah, we all call it dollar, and that's okay. You know, in contracts we have specific language. In everyday speech we have less specific language. Okay, but Congress has never violated the Constitution by calling this a dollar. Congress has never violated the Constitution by calling this the monetary unit of the United States or the monetary unit of account. Those are three sins that it has never committed, and that's very vital. It's a blessing. It's a blessing to us. So this goes to the question, what is the dollar? Will the real United States, here's a national bank note for $1 from National Bank of Hyannis. Is that in Florida? Or is that in Massachusetts? Anyway, national bank note. Here's my check to Justin McGill last year, and I made that only for the sake of putting on this slide. I made this slide a year ago, you know. Here's the Federal Reserve's note for $1. None of these things is the dollar. They're all promises of $1. That's the United States dollar, always has been. Well, we'll go through the evolution of it, and I'll say that you can see, yeah, that's partially a true answer. Say, someone have, okay. That's the United States dollar. This is the evolution of the United States dollar. It began in the, 15 or 1600s when Joachim von Joachimsthal, who had a lot of silver in his county or whatever he ruled, and they started minting Joachimsthaler, meaning they're coins that were mined out of Joachimsthal. And they became so honored for their integrity, they never clipped them like most monarchs do. They never dropped them in a bag and shook them up so that little pieces of dust would come and they could make more coins. Never defrauded anybody, so they got a good name. So lots of countries, lots of kingdoms, lots of duchies around the world started minting coins and calling them dollars to sort of put on their shoulders that reputation of integrity. And in
Morgan's dollars?
Yeah, we'll get to Morgan dollars, yeah. And that. By the way, if you win first place in that quiz, you'll get 2 Morgans. And if you win second place, you'll get 1. Okay, but we're not to the United States yet. We're working our way up through history. Then Ferdinand and Isabella, they said, hey, let's make a real. But people started calling it $1. And that real was dividable with on a chopping block into 8 bits. That's why we talk about 8 bits to the dollar. That's why the Wall Street used to sell shares in eighth of dollars, okay? Grew up like that, okay? And people started calling, the Spaniards didn't, Ferdinand and Isabella and their successors didn't, as far as I know, but maybe they did eventually. They called them reals, which means royal, okay? But everybody else in the world called them dollars, probably because they resembled Joachim's dollars. Okay, America started using those in the 1600s. And by 1707, Americans were using more of those dollars than they were using pounds because they had more trades with the Caribbean and South America and Central America than they had with Mother England. And so Queen Anne in 1707 said, well, dang, it's always been the king's duty to regulate the value of currency. That means to say how many of these is equal to how many of those in a court of law or at a customs house. Well, I'm the monarch. I'm telling you, $1 should be exchanged for this many pounds or this many kroner or this many whatever. So she regulated it, and Parliament, not to be outdone, you remember ever since the English Civil War, there was this struggle. Is that a parliamentary power or is that a royal power? And the king or queen would always say it's a royal power, and Parliament would say, no, that's a parliamentary power. So to not be outdone or left in the dark, be upstaged, Parliament promptly passed a law repeating what Queen Anne had decreed. Okay, so from that point on, use of dollar increased in America until independence. And again, I told you, days after independence, we took steps to make it not just one of 2, but the unit of account in America. It was still printed in Spanish mints in Peru, in Mexico, in Cuba, in different places, but used by us. It was the current coin of the United States. It was the most current coin of the United States. Okay, then we pass our new Constitution. We decide explicitly to continue it as the unit of account of our country, and so and to give Congress power to create a mint and dollar. So the first Mint Act that we did, somebody said, you know what? We got millions of dollars in these United States from New Hampshire to Georgia. They're not all identical. Some are more worn off than others. Since in the Constitution we've specifically made it clear that that's still our unit of account, somewhere along the line, it might be good to have a legal definition of exactly how many grains of fine silver it contains. So, according to the Mint Act of 1792, we measured and chemically analyzed thousands and thousands of them, from north to middle to south, and we came up with an average. And that's the official definition to this day of the dollar that in the Constitution we explicitly carry over. It's 371.25 grains of fine silver. Okay, so that's the evolution of the dollar. It never went to this step. That's always been a note for $1, a promise of $1. And they used to honor them. The first couple of decades, they kept them current by honoring them. But they had in the back of their pants that clause in the Federal Reserve Act that says they're obligations of the United States, which means if the banks don't honor them, the Treasury of the United States will. That's unlawful. It's making the government of the United States a surety for a private profit. But that's what they did, and that's what's kept them current long after they are no longer redeemable. Long after FDR decreed that no one should decree them, should honor them. And long after Congress seconded him and said, no one will honor this. Even though it's still on the books, an obligation of the United States, no one will honor this, okay? Okay, but what's kept it current is the fact that Congress calls it an obligation of the United States. So if you owe $1 to the Treasury, the Treasury will, because it's in an embarrassing position, accept a Federal Reserve note, okay? So what has all this to do with the question of how do we evade our calamity? Well, it has a lot to do. It has to do with the solution of this imminent catastrophe is to jump not out of, see these people, they're building lifeboats. They're building lifeboats. And those lifeboats, we're going to talk about what some of those might be. They might be the Liberty Dollar, they might be Bitcoin, they might be other things. My proposition is that we jump back into the dollar, and tomorrow and the next day we'll go into more detail why that is the solution of solutions. Okay, nothing's perfect when you live in a government of men, and we all suffer under a government of men. We haven't lived under a government of laws in decades. That's why we're all here. We're trying to go back in that direction, aren't we? But you create layers of impregnability for yourself if you want to create an alternative currency. And my argument is the alternative currency of choice is not something alternative, but the real thing. Okay? Jump back into, not out of, the dollar. And then tomorrow we'll talk about things that the county, that you can do with your county and your state to prime that pump, to start that circulating, to make it current again, and why it is necessary that you have government force behind you, that you're not left naked like a Bernard von Nothaus to the ravages of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and DOJ and other ruthless people, because they have trillions and trillions. They will beat you, they will destroy you as soon as you start to become a threat to their fraud. So that's my pitch. Jump out of the Federal Reserve note, back into the dollar, and tomorrow, where are we on time? I think this is a good cutting place.
Yeah, we're pretty much the end.
Great. Do we have time for a couple of questions, or we're time to go to dinner? Okay, so tomorrow we're going to pick up here and we're going to compare in a spreadsheet the virtues or vices of the Federal Reserve note versus several alternatives. The Liberty Dollar, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others versus the original dollar, and compare their strengths and weaknesses. And then we'll visit some principles of how to make good legislation to make that happen, and why it's important to get it right so that you're actually not making the problem worse. Questions from the audience before we go eat? Yes, sir. Oh, yes.
So a contract that says something's being paid in U.S. dollars.
Yes. It will be enforced. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't let me anticipate your question.
Okay.
Go. No, go ahead. I don't want to anticipate your question. I always make a mistake, and my wife tells me this all the time. I anticipate where people are going, and I'm wrong usually.
I'm trying to process it in my own mind.
Yeah.
On one hand, they'd say it's not enforceable of notes. I mean, it shouldn't be legally enforceable as payments of the Federal Reserve notes. But yet, on the other hand, it's not done with the concept of the value of a real dollar.
Yeah, for decades now, the courts, there's a lot of jurisprudence on this, and there's almost no jurisprudence, okay? Because the courts understand where the bread is buttered too. And that's why it's important to interpose between you and the general government the authority of the county government and your state government, because, and we'll talk about some things you can do, because the courts are either ignorant or more likely in on it, and the jurisprudence on this is almost always, not always, sometimes the courts get it right, jurisprudence, what I call jurisprudence. They purposely misreading the statute, purposely misreading the precedent that they're citing. Okay, yes, sir. Did I get the question right though before I answered it?
Yeah, you did.
So let me repeat that question. So the question.
How's your pension paid? Is it paid?
Yeah, I get Federal Reserve notes on the first of every month. First of every month, they send me a direct deposit for, I don't know, $5,400 something in Federal Reserve notes. They don't pay me real dollars.
That's digital Federal Reserve.
And that's even digital, which is one step worse. And the next step worse than that is CBDCs. Okay, but they're all based on the same fraud. Instead of giving me the real dollar, they give me a note for $1 that they know won't be repaid and that they have forbidden to be repaid, even though they called it their obligation. But the reason they accept it and circulate it is because they have called it an obligation of the United States. Not lawfully, but lawfully. So if I owe $20 to the general government, I'm going to give them a Jackson? I'm going to give them a Jackson instead of $20 because the Jackson is relatively worthless and $20 is worth a lot. It's Gresham's law. If the law or the courts artificially put two unlike things on a parity before the law, then the worthless one will circulate current and the valuable one people will hold to themselves. That's just an economic law. Yes, sir.
Real quick, my understanding is that the FDR's discharges debt, you don't pay the debt.
That's what legal tender acts are. That's what they're all about.
What I'm getting at is that I think we all could agree it's all fraud.
Yes.
It's fraud. And with that being said, why is it that all these politicians act as though it's not fraud, that everything is fine, and that everyone should just go along, get along,
Okay.
currency and those other junk. So what I'm getting at though is that there's other groups too, but what I'm saying though is that I come to the conclusion that these parties, Republican, Democratic Party, they're playing along with this charade. That's my take on it.
Okay, let me restate your question then. I think your question is, tell me if I restated it right, is why does Congress in both houses, why do the major political parties play along with the charade when they must know it's a charade? Is that a correct restatement of the question?
Well, there may be some that do not think that it's a charade.
Yeah.
They use it so well, but then again, there are people that know the score. I mean,
So you're saying some of our Congress critters know the score, others are ignorant,
just go along with it because just.
and why do they go along with it?
Well, that too. But what I'm getting at though is that we're going along with things that we don't really need to go along with. We're just doing it because it's convenient.
Okay.
Just go along with it. Just don't say anything. Just go about your business.
Yes.
do
So
whatever.
the question is, why do our public servants, those who know it's a fraud, go along with it, and those that don't go? Those who don't go along with it because everybody else is. Those who know it's a fraud go along with it because it's a very lucrative. It's the most lucrative criminal conspiracy that is in our country's history. How do congressmen and all our public servants get elected to power over your life, liberty, and property? By promising you, if you will let me take this oath, I will violate it, and I will violate it for you and you and you. But the people who get done to don't vote for him. So the beauty of the Federal Reserve System, and it began with the Bank of England in a big way, was how about instead of putting me in jail for issuing fraudulent notes, how about you, the King and Parliament, not only look the other way, but allow me a special monopoly to be the only person that does this. And then I will let you have more revenue than the taxpayers will bear without pitchforks. So it's the corrupt public servant who's gotten into power by promising to violate his oath for you and you alone, making a corrupt bargain with the banker who is issuing fraudulent notes, saying, yes, issue as many as you can and I'll buy stuff with them and buy votes with them. And then people won't come after us with pitchforks. They'll think it's General Motors or somebody else who's at fault. That's the key thing. But most congressmen are simply ignorant. They're as ignorant as the rest of us. They're monetarily illiterate. Yes, sir.
Originally, silver and gold were the coins, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now, you go today, and the price of gold and silver is way high. Now, you go 25 years ago, it was way down low. we say that Congress is the only one that determines how much it is valued. Well, how on earth has it gone from this amount to way up high without Congress doing anything?
Okay, so let me restate the question. I think tell me if I restate the question right. It's a two-part question. Why is it that gold, as you say, has gone like this and like this, and Congress never had a say, and Congress is the only creature with any power to regulate the value? Okay, that's the answer to that is a three-part answer. One, to a very real extent, it has, but to a very real extent, gold has not gone like this, but the Federal Reserve note has gone like this. Okay, that's the first part of the answer to your question. You know what I'm saying? The Federal Reserve note, which is worthless, it takes more of them to buy the same amount of gold or silver now because there are trillions more of them in circulation than they were. So that's just economic law and inflation. Okay, the second part of your question needs to be answered by understanding the particular term of art regulate the value thereof. It does not mean pass by statute how many this or that or the other you can buy with these coins, but to pass by statute how many of these coins, for instance, American gold eagles or Swedish kroner, will be accepted against one U.S. silver dollar. That's what it's meant for hundreds of years in Anglo-American law. To regulate the value of coin is to say which coin is the standard, which is the unit of account, and what is the scientific answer to how much gold or silver in fine grains it contains. And tell me about this other coin, the kroner or the florin or the mark or whatever. What has it got in it? How many grains of fine gold or fine silver? Okay, how are those two metals on the international market meeting? And according to that scientific mathematical determination, to say in courts of law and at our customs houses, we will receive this many kroner, this many marks against a silver dollar, or this many American gold eagles against a silver dollar. So, and then the final part, because the three-part to answering that question, and I've lost my train of thought to the third part. The third, oh, you helped me out. There are three parts to the answer, and I got two of them, and I'm senile, and I lost the rest of it. But did that help at all? Right, the price is only, if it's denominated in funny money as it is, you think gold has gone up. Now, that's a simplistic answer because in fact, in times of panic, the real valuation of one person versus another on the market in things that are durable they price it more. So my answer was only partially true, but essentially it was true. It wasn't, yes ma'am, Janine. Those are the coins of the, okay. The coin, the unit of account in America is and always has been the dollar. So it is today. This is still the unit of account of the United States, and it has the same amount of grains of fine silver as the Spanish pilar and Spanish real have had for hundreds of years, okay? We only defined that weight and fineness in America for American purposes in 1792, okay? But we made gold eagles and we've made other coins. In making them, Congress has always regulated their value against the dollar. And what that means is not what it will buy in other things, but in courts of law and at our customs houses, how many of that other coin will be acknowledged as equal to this dollar. That's what that specific term of art means. Remember what I said? There's about a dozen terms of art in the monetary clauses of our Constitution. Every one of them means a very specific thing. And the only way you're going to know what that means is to do what I encourage people to do. Make your way through the standard work on the subject, Edwin Vieira's Pieces of Eight. I'm nearing my second time through it in several years, annotating it carefully. It's a major study, but it will be, I promise you, one of the intellectual adventures and joys, exhilarations of your life. Because again, I know of no mind like his after the 19th century. I'm not exaggerating. I know of no writer who writes with that lucidity later than mid-19th century. Yes, sir.
Is a silver certificate money?
Yes, it's money, but it's not what it promises. It's a promise for something. Now, in our Constitution, we have forbidden the Treasury to issue gold or silver certificates, but they've done it. The first time they did it was in 1862 or 3.
They did in the 1700s.
No, not since our Constitution they haven't. No one has since our Constitution. Private banks did and states did, but the general government of the United States, after we adopted our Constitution, never dared to emit a bill of, that's a bill of credit. Never dared until the height of the Civil War. Salmon Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, knew it was wrong, but he went before Congress, presumably with Lincoln's blessing, and I'm a huge Lincoln admirer, to argue Congress, give us a law that says the Treasury can issue Treasury notes. That's a bill of credit. Verboten. And they did. But here's a miracle. This never happens. When your congressman or your president or your secretary of the Treasury violates the Constitution, does he or she ever in subsequent years fess up and say, I violated the Constitution? Salmon Chase did when he was Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. After the war, people started suing about the fraud of these U.S. Treasury issuing Treasury notes. You're not authorized to do that. That's a bill of credit. We deliberately denied you that power. Why did you do it? Bless his heart, he wrote court opinions acknowledging, yes, it was unlawful. Yes, we did it, we were under duress. But yes, it was unlawful, and it's unlawful today. I just don't know an example of our history of someone who violated his oath and then later confessed in open court, literally in court, that he had done so. Yes, sir.
Technically, the government could issue the federal or the silver certificate, and then we would turn it into the Treasury and get silver.
Well, that's what they say on their face, and that's what they used to. Oh,
And that's what they used to do. But now they, starting with FDR and the gold certificate, made it unlawful to do that.
okay. Let me restate your question. He said, yeah, presumably if you had a Treasury note, a silver certificate, a gold certificate, presumably the Treasury would honor that with the actual coin. And yes, it did do that after the Civil War. It took several years, but the Treasury did make good on every single one of those notes. But the point is, they were unlawful the day they were issued because we denied that power. But they did honor them. And then you said, moving up to FDR by diktat said, even though the Federal Reserve Act calls these our obligations, we will not, and the Fed will not honor them ever. And then Congress followed up and stamped that. But what people don't know is in the 70s, Congress repented of that. And I've made people make contracts now for gold and silver coin. I bought a share in a silver mine 15 years ago, and I paid for it with American silver dollars, and it states that very explicitly in the contract. So no, gold and silver contracts, there is no longer any statute standing as an impediment. Congress every now and then does repent. Very rarely, but
They
sometimes
only
it.
repented that we could have gold and silver. They didn't repent saying that we can take a silver certificate and exchange it back for
Well, again, the silver certificates existence is unlawful. Existence, even if they honor it, is unlawful. Private individuals can issue certificates. Banks can issue certificates, but if they don't honor them, in my opinion, they should go to jail. Okay. Okay. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, I understand it based on what you've said.
Okay.
We're going to go ahead and break here. Dinner's going to be at 6 o'clock in the next room over. But
All
feel
right.
free to hang out and talk some more.
All right.
we're gonna-
Thank you for helping me make this
Yeah.
work, boy.
Always
And
fun.
tomorrow we'll continue with why should we use the dollar? What can we do in our states and our counties to put some government muscle behind it, and how to do that.
Leander,
Yes, sir.
one quick question.
Yes, sir.
In 1862, when Congress passed
Yeah,
the silver
yeah.
certificate,
I-
did the southern states